Welcome to the National Manufacturing Debate 2012 at Cranfield University, and welcome to Mark Lee, Head of Manufacturing at Barclays. Thanks very much for your presentation this morning, Mark, on searching for growth. One of the focuses of today's debate focuses on the role of SMEs in growing the supply chain and enhancing the supply chain for manufacturing in the UK. But one of the major complaints of SMEs is still that they can't gain the access to finance that they need for growth. What is your response to that?
So I think there are a number of ways that banks can assist companies in using the supply chain for growth. And two of the themes of my conversation, my presentation this morning, were around de-risking the supply chain and really trying to efficiently fund the supply chain. I think Barclays as a bank can be very helpful in both of those things, and we do help many of our customers in those two things. So just to take them in that order. So de-risking the supply chain to me is about, first and foremost, taking out foreign exchange, commodity risk, any market risk that is in that supply chain, but also taking out some of the counterparty risk that sits in that supply chain. So using trade finance instruments to help support, to help mitigate any credit risk that people might have in that supply chain. And I think from a sort of working capital perspective, the second point, really a bank can help by trying to fund the most appropriate point in that supply chain. We've had quite a bit of success as a bank in putting together supply chain finance programs for some of the larger manufacturers out there across the UK who are really looking to both support and to tie in their supply chain. So we've had several instances globally and in the UK where we've been able to do that for some of our clients.
Excellent. Do you think the current crisis in the eurozone has significantly changed the way that manufacturers in the UK need to look at enhancing their supply chain?
I think it's one of the factors. I think there's been a number of factors over the last 24 months, I'd say probably about that timing, that's made people really think about their supply chain. And part of that is, back to my earlier point, market driven by volatility. But I think also things like Fukushima in Japan, things like the Arab Spring, have really made people think about whether they need to diversify that supply chain globally, whether they need to diversify across different regions, across different sizes and types of suppliers. So I think that there are many factors which have altered people's outlook and certainly made the supply chain more a discussion point at the board table than perhaps it was before. And look, the eurozone has absolutely been one of those. I haven't seen any particular instances yet where that has changed behaviours, but I think it is very much one of the things that's really bringing supply chain back into focus for manufacturers. Mm.
Your presentation talked about export opportunities, and particularly growing export opportunities in less obvious economies. I wonder if you could just describe a little bit what you mean by those less obvious economies.
Okay, sure. So I think one of the areas that we're very much focusing on with our clients at the moment is Africa as an export market, and I think for some businesses that hasn't always been seen as a natural export market. I think when people talk about export markets, obviously 58% of UK manufacturing goes to the eurozone. I think people are now starting to think a little bit broader than just that, and they're thinking about Asia and the Middle East. But Africa, very much a growing, vibrant market, which we see as having real untapped demand from a UK manufacturer's perspective. So I guess that was one of the markets that I was talking about when I said that.
Mm. At the manufacturer, we've spoken to a number of manufacturers in the UK who have said that they find it difficult, having internationalised their companies, to get banks to recognise their liquidity across international boundaries. Is that a problem that you've come across?
I think with becoming an international company, it does change the dynamic of your business, and by definition, it brings new businesses, new risks into your business that perhaps weren't there before. But I think it also brings enormous potential for us to use some of the trade finance projects I talked about earlier to try and mitigate that risk. I certainly wouldn't say that it changes our behaviour and appetite to that company. I think it is very much about enhancing the company. But from our perspective, it is all part of a credit story that we look at when we engage with clients. From my perspective, I certainly see international expansion as being a positive.
Another problem in terms of cash flow that particularly SMEs in the UK are having at the moment is to do with prompt payment, and this obviously relates to supply chain as well. A recent study showed that around £27,000 is owing to any one SME at one time in the UK, and this can obviously be debilitating for the supply chain. What's your advice to companies that are trying to deal with prompt payment issues?
That's a good question. I think from my perspective, I guess I turn that the other way slightly and think about what we can do in that situation. And I think what we have the ability to do as a bank with a good client base across the UK, good penetration of clients across the UK, is think about that whole supply chain and think about how the SME fits into that supply chain and what the most appropriate way to fund all those various aspects of the supply chain are. So I think part of that is clearly the contracts between SMEs and the larger manufacturers out there that they're supplying to, and trying to see whether we can do something around that contract and finance that contract to make it easier for SMEs to access financing, rather than just looking at them as a standalone entity with a turnover by itself. And we often find that looking at that holistic picture gives us the ability to fund something we wouldn't otherwise be able to do.
Returning to today's debate as an event, do you have a belief in events like this to make a real impact on the fortunes of industry?
I think to me it is a great indication today of how many people have joined this event. I think the registration list was something like 290 people. I think some of the figures that we have coming along to this afternoon's panel, I think, shows a huge sort of groundswell of opinion around the manufacturing space, and I think that's borne out through the press. It's borne out through the government as well, and the focus that as a sector manufacturing is getting, quite rightly, from where it has been perhaps in the medium term past. So I think events like this are fantastic. Obviously they are all about taking things away and enacting upon them, but from my perspective this is a fantastic forum. I'm very glad to be part of it.
And are there any particular points that you'll be listening out for this afternoon to hear from manufacturers about their concerns?
I think from my perspective, part of the reason to come to something like this is to hear those things and to hear them firsthand from various different manufacturers and stakeholders across the industry. So in terms of specifics, I expect there to be a lot of chat around the supply chain and how efficient we can make that, and from my perspective, how efficiently we can finance that. So I'd like to see some good challenge around that. But I think from me it is really getting a barometer of the industry and hearing some of the challenges and opportunities that people are talking about, really. So I'm hoping to hear all those good things.
That's great. Thank you, Mark.